This is a Ayahuasca trip report by Sherlockalien, posted to arrowwood.org on November 29, 2007. I had not taken ayahuasca for almost a whole year. In the months that passed, I had many moments that felt like lessons. Some of those moments seemed to change me. Some felt like they only changed my story about myself. I wanted to see whether the change was real or whether it was only my ego telling me that I had grown. When a friend called me and said that a shaman from an Amazon tribe would be in town for a few days, I felt a pull. He said the shaman would hold a ritual on a farm that belonged to another friend, and that the ceremony would start that night. I agreed immediately. The shaman was 28 years old, according to the calendar, but when I looked into his eyes, I saw something much older. There was a quiet depth there that made me feel that he had lived many lifetimes inside his mind. I arranged a ride with the owner of the farm. We left in the early afternoon of Saturday, knowing that the ritual would begin after dark around 10 o'clock. The drive was short, but the road was lined with trees that seemed to whisper as the wind moved through them. I felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness building inside me. When we arrived, the farm was quiet, the sky turning pink as the sun set behind a green hill in the distance. The area where the ceremony would take place was a clearing surrounded by trees. In the middle of the clearing, a fire burned, tended by a single man who kept the flames steady. The fire gave off a soft orange glow that danced on the faces of the people gathered around it. There were 20 people in the circle, about half of whom I already knew from previous events. The rest were strangers, many of them in their 20s, 5 of them taking ayahuasca for the first time. 6 of the participants were women. In the Santo Daime tradition, the circle is sometimes divided by gender, but this shaman did not follow that rule. The women and men sat together, couples next to each other, and the whole group felt more like a family than a formal arrangement. The shaman stood in the center of the circle, his shoulders relaxed, a pipe of natural tobacco in his hand. He began to speak in his native language, his voice low and steady. He told us that each person would travel inside themselves, that the journey could become rough at times, and that he would be there to watch over us. He explained that purging, vomiting, crying, sweating, a runny nose was an important part of the process. He said that the songs he would sing were not meant to be understood with the mind, but to be felt with the body. Each song had a purpose. Some would open the eyes, some would give strength, some would bring peace. He then invited us to focus on the fire, to let the sounds of the night sink in, and he began to walk around the circle, smoking from his pipe. The scent of the tobacco rose and fell with each breath he took. The fire crackled, insects sang, and a distant owl hooted. I felt the night closing in around us, a blanket of darkness punctuated by the firelight. When he was ready, the shaman took 2 glass bottles from a bag. The liquid inside was thick and brown, the color of river mud after a storm. He raised his hands, murmuring prayers in his language, and then began to hand the brew to each person. He moved counterclockwise, looking directly at each participant before pouring. He seemed to decide how much to give based on something he felt inside himself. When it was my turn, the first bottle was already empty. He was already holding the second one. I felt a flicker of worry. The last time I had taken ayahuasca, 1 glass was not enough to start the journey. He filled my glass almost to the brim. I lifted it, feeling the weight of the liquid in my hand, and drank it in 2 large gulps. The taste was strong, bitter, like a mixture of earth and metal, and it filled my throat with a hot fire. The shaman began to sing in a low tone. His voice rose and fell like a wave, each note landing on the night air. As he sang, I felt a strange light-headedness spreading through my head. It was not a dizzy feeling, but more like the world was becoming a little softer at the edges. My body began to feel heavy, as if my limbs were melting together, each part of me blending into the next. I tried to stand, but my legs felt glued to the ground. I sat down, crossed my legs, and rested my elbows on my knees, my hands covering my face. In that position, I could not tell where my fingers ended and where my forearms began. The firelight reflected on my closed eyelids, creating patterns that seemed to pulse. Soon after, I saw shapes. At first, they were simple, like lines that repeated and grew. Then they became fractal patterns, spirals within spirals, each turning into the next. The colors were bright, but I could not name them. They were more like feelings than visual shades. My mind tried to name them, to label them, but the images slipped away as soon as I reached for a word. The shaman's song grew louder, the rhythm matching the beat of my heart. He asked the group if anyone still felt nothing and wanted a second dose. Some people raised their hands, some shook their heads. I felt the brew moving through me, a slow river that was beginning to rise. I wanted to go deeper, to see the bottom of the hole that seemed to open inside me. I told the shaman that I wanted another glass. He poured a second dose, this time a little less than the first, but still enough to fill the glass. I drank it in one sip. The liquid tasted the same, but now it felt like a second wave crashing over the first. I could feel the energy in the circle shift, a subtle hum rising among us. The shaman's voice rose to a higher pitch, the notes becoming sharper, more urgent. It felt as if the fire itself were singing with him. The visions multiplied. The fractal patterns grew in size and complexity, filling my entire field of view even though my eyes were closed. Light seemed to pour from every point, a white that held every possible color inside it. It was not a bright glare, but a gentle illumination that made everything feel alive. I could sense a presence watching me, a collection of beings that were both solid and translucent. Their forms shifted constantly, like oil on water, never staying the same shape for more than a breath. One of those beings seemed to focus on a knot of energy that I felt in my stomach. It was a tight, twisted ball that pulsed with a low vibration. The beings moved around it, their hands reaching, their fingers brushing the knot as if they were trying to untangle it. I felt a strange urge to vomit, to push that knot out of my body. The knot rose slowly like a bubble in water, and the beings guided it upward. Their intention was not aggressive. It felt like a gentle coaxing, an invitation to release. I opened my eyes briefly, the fire reflected in the darkness, and I saw the circle of people around me. Their faces were soft, eyes half closed, some breathing heavily, some still. The shaman continued to sing, his voice now a deep chant that resonated in my chest. I felt the knot rise higher, the pressure in my stomach increasing. I stood up, unsteady, and took 2 steps toward the edge of the circle. My stomach contracted, and I began to vomit. The act was sudden, a rush of liquid and bile that left my throat burning. It felt like a purge, a clearing of something that had been stuck for a long time. After the vomiting, I felt lighter. The knot was gone, replaced by an emptiness that felt like a clean slate. I walked toward the bathroom, the night air cool against my damp skin. As I passed another participant, he looked at me and said, "Man, we cannot waste time. Gotta make life worth living." I answered, "Why no? Every second is a galaxy." It was as if we shared a thought without speaking it aloud. The words lingered in my mind as I washed my hands and returned to the circle. When I sat down again, the shaman's song had returned to a softer tone. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the night. I felt a new wave of images, myself sitting at a computer, hours slipping by, my mind drifting to other tasks even as my hands moved. I saw myself stretching, exercising, but my thoughts already planning the next thing. It was a reminder that my attention often floated away from the present. The shaman continued to sing, each phrase feeling like a pulse that moved through the group. Some people began to cry, their tears falling onto the ground, mixing with the ash of the fire. Others started to sweat, their bodies glistening in the firelight. The air was thick with the scent of the brew, the tobacco, and the earth. I felt the rhythm of the ceremony rise and fall. The shaman's voice was steady, never breaking, each note carrying a purpose that I could not label but could feel. The fire seemed to grow taller, its flames licking higher, casting shadows that danced on the faces of the participants. The night sounds, crickets, distant owls, the rustle of leaves, blended with the chant, creating a soundscape that felt both intimate and vast. As the night deepened, the visions became more vivid. I saw layers upon layers of color and light, each layer moving independently yet connected to the next. The beings that had guided my knot reappeared, now surrounding me, their presence comforting. They did not speak, but their intention was clear. They wanted me to look inside, to see the parts of myself that were hidden. I felt a pull toward the center of the circle, as if an invisible string was drawing me forward. My steps were slow, each footfall resonating with the beat of the shaman's song. The fire's heat brushed my skin, and I could taste the smoke on my tongue. I reached the center, and the beings seemed to gather around me, their forms swirling like a vortex of light. In that moment, I sensed a knot forming again, this time not in my stomach but in my chest. It was a heaviness, a pressure that seemed to hold my heart. The beings reached toward it, their translucent hands hovering just above the knot. I felt a pressure to release, to let the knot rise and fall, to let it be taken away. The shaman's chant rose, a higher pitch that seemed to vibrate through my ribs. I did not know how long I stayed there, but the feeling of the knot rising persisted. My breath grew shallow, each inhale feeling like a pull on the knot, each exhale like a gentle push. The fire crackled louder, sending sparks into the night sky. The sounds of the forest seemed to swell, as if the trees themselves were listening. My body trembled, a shiver that ran from my fingertips to my toes. I could feel the knot move, a slow ascent, guided by the unseen hands. The beings did not force it. They coaxed it, as if they were waiting for me to be ready. I felt a sense of surrender, a willingness to let go of the tightness that had lived inside me for a long time. The shaman's voice, the fire, the night, the beings, the knot, all of them blended into a single experience that felt both overwhelming and gentle. I was aware of the circle around me, of the people who were also traveling inside themselves, of the shaman who watched over us with steady eyes. The night was deep, stars above us were hidden by the canopy, but the light from the fire illuminated everything in a warm glow. I could sense the moment stretching, as if time itself had slowed. The knot rose higher, and I felt a pressure building in my throat, a need to expel something. The shaman's chant reached a crescendo, a note that seemed to hold the entire night in its vibration. I realized that I was at the edge of another purge, another release. I did not know what would come out, but I felt that it was necessary. The fire crackled, the shaman sang, the beings hovered, and I stood on the brink of another wave. I could feel my heart beating, and I could feel my heart beating in my throat, a thudding that seemed to echo through the hollow of my chest. The firelight flickered across the faces of the people around me, casting long shadows that moved like living things. The shaman's voice rose and fell in a pattern that matched the rhythm of my pulse, each syllable a weight that pressed down and then released. I sensed the knot in my stomach tightening, a rope being pulled upward, and I knew that the moment of release was near. The pressure built until it felt as if my ribs would split. I opened my mouth and inhaled the humid night air, then forced the breath out in a ragged gasp. The shaman's chant reached a high point, a note that seemed to vibrate the very ground beneath the fire. I stood as if on a ledge, my legs trembling, and took 2 unsteady steps toward the edge of the circle. My vision narrowed to a tunnel of firelight and darkness, and then the knot surged up, pulling everything inside me toward the surface. I vomited. The taste of the brew was bitter and metallic. In the act of expelling it felt like a sudden release of a dam that had held back a river for years. My body convulsed, and I felt a wave of heat rush through my limbs. The fire crackled louder as if cheering me on. I could hear the shaman's voice over the sound of my own retching, a steady chant that seemed to hold me in place even as my body shook. When the purge subsided, I felt a strange lightness in my chest, as if something heavy had been removed. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand and looked around. The people in the circle were watching me with eyes that held concern and understanding. Some of them were also coughing, some were sobbing, and a few were simply sitting still, their faces serene. The shaman stepped forward, his eyes never leaving mine, and gave a small nod. He seemed to say that the first part of the journey was over, and that the next phase was beginning. I returned to my seat, the fire now a low glow against the dark canopy. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and the lingering scent of the brew. My mind was no longer a single thread, but a bundle of many threads, each pulling in a different direction. The shaman began to sing again, his voice lower now, more resonant, as if he were calling something from deep within the forest. The sound seemed to wrap around me, and I felt my thoughts slow down, each one lingering longer before moving on. Visions appeared behind my closed eyes. At first they were simple shapes, spirals of bright color that rotated slowly, like a kaleidoscope turned by a gentle hand. The colors were not the soft pastels of a dream, but vivid, saturated hues that seemed to pulse with their own life. I could feel the light of those colors on my skin, a warmth that spread from my forehead down to my fingertips. The shapes grew larger, forming patterns that resembled veins of light running through a dark surface. I could sense that these patterns were not random. They were arranged in a way that felt purposeful, as if each line connected to another in a network that held some kind of information. The shaman's chant shifted, and with it the visions changed. I saw a river of liquid silver flowing through a canyon of stone. The water moved with a steady rhythm, carving the rock as it went. I could hear the sound of the water, a soft rush that blended with the shaman's voice. The river seemed to carry something bright and golden, and as it passed by, I felt a tug in my chest, as if the river were pulling at a thread inside me. I realized that the thread was the same knot I had expelled earlier, now transformed into something softer, more fluid. The river led me to a clearing in the forest where a group of beings stood. They were not human, yet they had a shape that I could recognize as a body. Their skin was translucent, and light passed through them in ripples. Their eyes were deep pools of color that reflected the firelight. They did not speak, but I could feel their intention. They pointed toward the river, then toward me, and I understood that they were guiding me to follow the flow of the water inside my own being. I rose from my seat, my legs still a little unsteady, and walked toward the edge of the fire. The ground was soft beneath my feet, covered with a thin layer of fallen leaves. As I moved, the fire's heat brushed my back, and I could feel the shaman's song vibrating through the air, a low hum that seemed to sync with my heartbeat. I reached the edge of the circle and looked out into the darkness beyond the fire. The forest stretched out like a black sea, its trees standing like silent sentinels. The beings followed me, their forms flickering like candle flames in the wind. They led me deeper into the forest, away from the fire and the circle. The path was narrow, covered in moss and small stones that made a soft crunch under my shoes. The shaman's chant faded into the background, replaced by the natural sounds of night. Insects chirping, a distant owl hooting, the rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze. I felt a sense of calm settle over me, a quiet that was different from the intense focus of the earlier part of the ceremony. We stopped at a small clearing where a single ancient tree stood, its trunk wide and gnarled, its roots sprawling like veins across the earth. The beings gathered around the base of the tree, forming a circle of light. I sat down on a fallen log and placed my hands on the bark. The texture was rough, the wood cool and damp. I closed my eyes and let the sensations of the night fill me. The tree seemed to breathe, its sap moving like a slow pulse. I could feel the vibration travel up through my hands, into my arms, into my shoulders, and finally into my head. A new wave of vision rose. I saw my life as a series of scenes projected onto the inner surface of the tree's bark. There were moments of joy, a birthday party with friends, the first time I rode a bike without training wheels, a sunrise over the ocean. There were moments of loss, the death of a close relative, a breakup, a period of unemployment. Each scene was vivid, the colors bright, the sounds clear. I could hear my own laughter, the sighs of disappointment, the quiet of a night spent alone. The tree held all of these moments without judgment, simply displaying them as part of a whole. The beings did not speak, but their presence was supportive. When a painful memory appeared, I felt a gentle pressure on my chest, as if someone were holding my hand. When a happy memory surfaced, I felt a warmth spreading through my torso like a soft blanket. The shaman's chant returned, faintly, as if carried on the wind, and it seemed to guide the flow of these images. I realized that the tree was not just a symbol, but a conduit, allowing me to see the pattern of my life in a way that was not possible in ordinary consciousness. I watched as the scenes shifted, merging into each other. The birthday party blended into the sunrise into the moment of loss, the loss into a scene of me sitting alone at a desk, staring at a computer screen. In that last scene, I felt a knot of frustration, a sense that I was wasting time. The beings pointed to that knot, and then to the sky above the tree. I understood that the knot was a reminder to act, to move forward, to not let the days slip by without purpose. I felt a surge of determination, a quiet resolve that settled deep within my ribs. The vision began to dissolve, the images fading like mist under the morning sun. The tree's bark returned to its ordinary darkness. The night sounds resumed their normal rhythm. The beings stepped back, their forms dimming, and the forest returned to its usual stillness. I opened my eyes and saw the fire still burning in the distance, its flames small but steady. I felt a gentle fatigue in my limbs, as if I had run a long distance and was now resting. I walked back to the circle, the path illuminated by the faint glow of fireflies. The people there were still seated, some with eyes closed, some with tears on their cheeks. The shaman stood near the fire, his pipe in hand, his eyes fixed on the embers. He gave a small smile, a gesture that seemed to say that the journey was not yet finished, but that I had reached an important point. We sat again in the circle. The shaman began to sing a slower song, one that felt like a lullaby. The notes were simple, each one lingering before the next began. As he sang, I felt a wave of calm wash over me, a sense of being held in a safe space. My breathing became deeper, each inhale filling my lungs fully, each exhale releasing tension I had not known I was holding. I felt my mind settle, the frantic images slowing to a gentle flow. The shaman's chant continued, and the fire crackled softly. I could feel the heat on my face, the scent of wood and smoke. I felt my heart settle into a steady rhythm, a slow drum that matched the shaman's song. My body was still, but my mind was alive with a quiet awareness. I realized that I was no longer chasing the visions, but simply observing them as they came and went, like clouds moving across the sky. The plateau arrived. It was not a dramatic high, but a steady state of presence. I could feel the weight of my body on the ground, the texture of the earth beneath me, the cool night air on my skin. The shaman's voice was a constant backdrop, a steady hum that anchored me. I noticed small details, the way the firelight reflected off a nearby leaf, the subtle shift of a moth's wings as it hovered near the flame, the faint scent of pine in the air. Each of these details felt amplified, as if my senses had been sharpened. During this time, thoughts continued to surface, but they no longer felt urgent. They arrived like gentle ripples on a pond. I thought about the knot I had expelled, about the responsibility I felt toward my own life, about the way I had been wasting time. I thought about the lesson that each moment is a chance to act, to be present, to choose. I thought about the beings I had seen, their translucent forms, their quiet guidance. I felt gratitude for their presence, even though they were not physically there in the way I could touch them. The shaman's song began to change subtly, the tempo slowing even more. He sang in a language that I could not understand, but the tone was soothing, like a mother's voice humming a child to sleep. I felt a deep sense of safety, as if I were wrapped in a blanket of sound. My eyes grew heavy, but I kept them open, watching the flames dance. The fire seemed to breathe, its flames rising and falling in a rhythm that matched my breath. After a while, the shaman lowered his voice even further, speaking in a calm, measured tone that was not a song but a spoken prayer. He asked each of us, one by one, how we felt, whether we needed anything, whether we wanted to share a thought. He moved around the circle, his presence grounding each person. When he reached me, he placed his hand lightly on my shoulder and asked if I wanted to speak. I did not have words, but I felt a strong urge to say that I was grateful for the chance to see my life in a new light, that I wanted to change the way I spent my days. The shaman nodded, his eyes reflecting the firelight, and said something that sounded like an affirmation, though I could not catch the exact words. The ceremony began to draw to a close. The shaman announced that the final dose could be taken by anyone who felt they needed it. I felt a pull toward the glass that lay on the ground beside me. The liquid inside was dark, almost black, with a faint sheen. I lifted it, feeling the cool glass against my palm, and took a small sip. The taste was bitter, but there was a hint of something sweet underneath. I swallowed, and the sensation spread through my throat like a gentle fire. The second peak was not as intense as the first, but it was different. It was more expansive, more inclusive. I felt a sense of connection to everything around me. The fire, the trees, the night sky, the people in the circle, the shaman, the beings I had seen earlier.